The Chicago Bears in 2014 were a disaster waiting to happen. If you followed me during last season, you watched my videos, you know I could see it coming, and I was telling everybody that it was coming, and it wasn't a matter of if but when it was going to happen. This was an overaged, overpaid, overrated, underproducing team that was a mess, that lacked leadership at all levels of the organization, lacked an identity, and earned the 5-11 record that they ultimately ended up getting out of that 2014 season. In fact, they were lucky to even win 5 games last year. So it's not a surprise during the offseason that the Chicago Bears got busy. Gone were general manager Phil Emery and head coach Mark Trestman and that coaching staff, thank God. In comes new general manager Ryan Pace and a head coach with previous NFL head coaching experience in John Fox. Along with him, established coordinators like Adam Gase on the offensive end, and in particular Vic Fangio on the defensive end. You know, it was good to see the Bears try, at least somewhat, I think, to go in a different direction and do things a little bit differently. And you could also see the changes through the offseason in terms of the guys they were willing to let leave, the guys that they got rid of, the trading of Brandon Marshall. When you trade your number one wide receiver over the past 3 seasons, that means that he is a part of the problem and he's not a part of the solution going forward. While a lot of Bears fans might not have been happy about it, I understood it because at the end of the day, it could be long-term an example of addition by subtraction. But gone also are longtime staples like Lance Briggs and Peanut Tillman, along with former 2011 second-round pick Stephen Paye, who was arguably, beyond question, their best defensive lineman, not named Willie Young, in 2014. It's not surprising to see when you have a 5-11 team, you're going to have a lot of turnover. You're going to get rid of a lot of guys because if they were that valuable, you wouldn't have finished 5-11. But in the offseason, the Bears did get active in free agency, but they didn't sit there and go blow the farm. They didn't sit there and overspend. They brought in kind of solid, under-the-radar type of pieces like Pernell McPhee and Antrell Roll and Eddie Royal, and some other guys on one-year kind of prove-it deals like Will Montgomery and Mason Foster, just to give you a couple of examples. I like what the Bears did in the offseason in terms of learning from the mistakes of the past as an organization, understanding that championship teams are not built primarily through free agency. They are built primarily through the draft. And when you look at the draft philosophy of the Chicago Bears in the 2015 NFL draft, it was interesting because here's a general manager running his draft for the first time with an organization and for a team that was so bad on the defensive end. You could see where there was some type of vision in place. There was some type of structure in place that says we're going to take best player available based off of what we see it. It's not just about need. It's not just about addressing this side of the ball because, frankly, from the Bears' standpoint, every draft since 2009, they devoted 2 of their first 3 picks to the defensive side of the ball, therefore criminally neglecting the offensive side of the ball, and a lot of those defensive picks busted out anyway, so now you got problems all over the place. So they draft Kevin White 7th overall, the wide receiver from West Virginia. They sit there and draft Eddie Goldman, the big nose tackle from Florida State in round 2, Hronis Grasu, the center from Oregon in round 3, Jeremy Langford, the running back from Michigan State in round number 4. To me, it was good to see that the Bears understood that the whole thing is a mess. And they have to improve in all areas, not just on the defensive side of the ball. So now with all these changes, in all this roster upheaval and turnover, what are their biggest strengths and biggest concerns for the team heading into 2015? Well, in terms of strengths, you got to look at the offensive skill positions. You still have Matt Forte, one of the very best all-around running backs in the National Football League. You got a very good tight end in Martellus Bennett when his head's screwed on straight. You still have a really good, at least number 2 wide receiver in Alshon Jeffrey, and we'll find out this year if he ends up being a number 1, along with guys like Eddie Royal, guys like Kevin White. The wide receiving core might actually be overall better in 2015 without Brandon Marshall because they've got somebody that could actually play out of the slot. They've increased their depth. So their offensive skill positions are still really good. This is also a team that will still be able to run the ball with Matt Forte. Their offensive line is solid as a run-blocking unit, even if they're somewhat depleted by injury. So I expect this team under John Fox and with his philosophy in place to be a team that will be able to run the ball and will have a consistent commitment to running the ball. And I think perhaps the biggest strength of all for this team, outside of perhaps the offensive skill positions, is the coaching staff. That's a huge strength to the Chicago Bears. You know, John Fox might have never won a Super Bowl, but he's gotten 2 different organizations to the Super Bowl. This is a guy that knows what he's doing to a certain degree. And while he's not perfect, he is a legit NFL head coach. And when you look at the Bears bringing in somebody that worked with Peyton Manning, a guy like Adam Gase on the offensive side, and bringing in Vic Fangio on the defensive side, you saw what the 49ers did in the defensive end for the past few years with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. You look at that coaching staff and you say, the Jimmies and Joes might not be there for the Bears, but the X's and O's are probably going to be in 2015. It still doesn't change the fact, though, that I've got a lot of concerns for this team. On the offensive side of the ball, you know, I could sit there and talk about Jay Cutler till I'm fucking blue in the face, but I've done it for 6 years now. I'm not even going to waste my time. Of course he's a concern. He's always a freaking concern. But it's more than that. I look at that offensive line. You've got Bushrod's over 30. You've got Slauson coming off of an injury. You've got uncertainty, I think, at the center position. You've got uncertainty at the right tackle position. You know, so you've got a lack of what I view as depth on the offensive line, and then I have some concerns about what type of level Bushrod's going to play at, or who's going to end up playing at right tackle and how well they're going to play. You know, that's a legitimate concern for a Bears team, I do believe, on the offensive side. And then on the defensive side of the ball, there's still a lot of concern. Even with John Fox and Vic Fangio in place, I look at their linebacking unit, and it doesn't inspire any type of confidence at all. I mean, you're talking about potential starters at inside linebacker like Shea McClellan or Jonathan Bostic or Mason Foster or an undrafted player from last year, Christian Jones. I mean, that's not going to inspire much confidence in anyone. And then you look outside at the edge rushers. You've got Pernell McPhee on one side, perhaps Willie Young, who himself is coming off of a major injury, on the other side. Then you throw in guys like Jared Allen and Lamar Houston. You know, where do they really fit into that system? I have significant concerns at all levels and all areas of that Bears linebacking core. And when you switch to a 3-4 defense like the Bears are doing for 2015, knowing that linebacking core is such an important part of what you do on defense, it's incredibly concerning that the most important part of that defense is easily, to me, beyond question, the weakest link, the weakest part, the weakest unit on that Bears defense. I also have some concerns about the secondary depth. While I think they improved at safety with the signing of Antrell Roll, with the drafting of Adrian Amos, at the end of the day, when I look outside at corner in particular, you've got Tim Jennings out there, yes. You've got Kyle Fuller out there, yes. But there's not a lot of depth out there at the corner position, and I'm not sure that there's still all that much of quality depth at the safety position. So those teams that run the 3-4 wide receiver, 5 wide receiver sets, or line up 2 tight ends outside, it could really cause the Bears some problems on defense, especially if that linebacking unit isn't really going to be able to get much of a consistent edge rush. That's a major concern I have for this team heading into 2015. Now, in terms of players to watch for the Bears on the offensive end, there's 2 of them. I think first you got to go with Alshon Jeffrey. Brandon Marshall is gone. Kevin White is the first-round pick, yes. But it's Alshon Jeffrey that's had the back-to-back big seasons. He's the one heading into a contract year, and I think part of the reason the Bears haven't given him a huge money deal at this point in time, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't anyways, is the fact that Alshon Jeffrey showed what he could do as a number 2 with Brandon Marshall playing on the other side of him. Can he really be a number 1? Can he validate and justify paying him number 1 money? Is he really the type of consistent threat outside that makes him a number 1 type of wide receiver in the NFL? And I'm not so certain that he is. And based off of his history, I don't think he is. He has those big games, and he has those games where he completely and totally disappears. So for a Bears offense that doesn't have a Brandon Marshall, that has a rookie outside in Kevin White, Alshon Jeffrey needs to be that guy. Because otherwise, if he's not that guy, it's going to really bog down that Bears passing game, and consequently, as a result, the Bears running game. I also think Jeremy Langford is a player to watch. I didn't see much that I liked out of Kadeem Carey last year, the Bears' 4th-round pick out of Arizona. The fact of the matter is, Forte is going to be 30 this year. He's in a contract year. The Bears have major questions at that position long-term, because I highly doubt they're going to invest big money long-term into Forte. With that said, you do have Forte in the fold this year, and while he is the clear-cut established starter, you have to be able to take some of that pressure off of him. you have to take some of that workload off of him. So that way you can focus more on the quality of what Forte does as opposed to just having to get pure quantity out of him. And a guy like Langford, their 4th-round pick out of Michigan State, could be that type of guy that could bring some type of balance, who could sit there and spell Forte, take some of the pressure off him, bring another element to that Bears rushing attack. I think he's a very important player to watch for this team's offense, even though he might not start at all in 2015 unless Forte gets hurt, and then he becomes a lot more important player to watch. On the defensive end, I got to look at Kyle Fuller, last year's 1st-round pick. He came out of the gate like gangbusters, and once he started getting hurt with the hip injury and everything, he really slowed down, and he's frankly regressed towards the end of his rookie season. But you look at him, all the physical tools are there, the playmaking ability is there. If he could sit there and be that type of guy that you saw at the beginning of the 2014 season, the Bears' secondary looks a whole lot better, even if they're lacking in depth. And I also look at Willie Young at the edge rush position. You got Pernell McPhee on one side. He's the big money free agent, if you will. But I look at Willie Young. He was their best, most consistent defensive lineman last year. He was their best, most consistent edge rusher. If they can get some type of edge rush out of him opposite McPhee, the defense is going to have a chance to, at least if anything else, be middle of the road in 2015. If they're a middle of the road defense, that is a huge step up and a huge improvement over what they were under Mel Tucker the previous 2 seasons. So I think Willie Young is a guy to really keep your eye on. In terms of the schedule for the Chicago Bears, they've got the AFC West and the NFC West, and then they've also, and by result of their last place schedule that they earned from last season, get to play Washington and Tampa Bay. Yippee. Of course, they've got their NFC North games and what have you. But in terms of key areas of the schedule to watch for the Chicago Bears, I'll start off with the opening 3 weeks of the season. They've got Green Bay at Soldier Field, and they've got Arizona at Soldier Field, and then they travel to Seattle. That's the opening stretch of the season for the Bears, their first 3 weeks. They've got to take on a Green Bay team that made it to the NFC Championship game, and in a lot of ways could legitimately feel like they should have played in Super Bowl 49. Then you've got the Arizona Cardinals, a playoff team from last year, a team the year before that won 10 games. While they would be in Soldier Field, the Cardinals are a much better team than the Bears, let's face it. And then you've got to go to Seattle, which in and of itself is a difficult place to play, on top of the fact that the Seattle Seahawks are just so far superior to the Bears. An 0-3 start to the season is very possible, if not likely, leaving this team in a huge hole right out of the gate. But then I also look at the month of November. They play actually 5 games in that month. And even if they're able to sit there and navigate that opening stretch of the schedule, and maybe they're able to either beat Green Bay miraculously or even in Arizona, then they beat Oakland in week 4. They get to a point where they get to November, they feel good about themselves. They've got a brutal stretch in November. They've got Minnesota, yes, in Soldier Field, but it's still Minnesota, and Minnesota beat them once last year. They've got to go to San Diego. They've got to go to St. Louis. And then they've got Denver at Soldier Field, and the Bears' track record against Peyton Manning, not good. It's an interesting matchup because of the elements there between Peyton Manning and John Fox. But that matchup doesn't look good for the Bears, and then they got to go on a Thursday night on Thanksgiving to Green Bay to play Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. So it's entirely possible in that November stretch the Bears could go 0-5 or 1-4. If the Bears want to be any type of competitive at all this year, they've got to find a way to at least win 1 of those first 3 games of the season, and they've got to find a way to win 2 or 3 of those November games. When just looking at it right now, it seems very, very unlikely. It's a tough schedule for the Bears based off of the way it breaks down and how it's structured, even though they were a last-place team last year. Now, in terms of my overall thoughts on the Bears, I do expect this team to be better in the sense that they're going to be better coached, they're going to be better prepared, they're going to be better disciplined, and they're actually going to have an identity, in particular on the defensive side of the ball, but also on the offensive side of the ball. I think there's going to be more of a consistency of mission, of message, of focus and direction, and that'll pay off. But I don't necessarily know for sure that it will pay off in the win-loss record. Because when you look back at 2014, yes, the Bears did win 5 games. Obviously, they lost their last 6 to close out the season. But this is a team, they won against San Francisco when San Francisco completely and totally imploded, had a 20-plus point lead against them. So that probably should have been an L for the Bears. You look at that Monday night game against the Jets, In a lot of ways, the Jets got hosed on a call before halftime, and then Geno was absolutely terrible. If Geno isn't absolutely terrible, they lose to the Jets. Now the Bears are 3-13. You look at Minnesota and Tampa Bay, those two games in the middle stretch of the season that they actually won that got them to 5-5. You know, if those offenses weren't so completely neutered and totally and completely incompetent at that stretch of the season, the Bears could have won or lost one or both of those games. You'd be looking at a 1-15 team where their only legitimate win of the season was Atlanta. That was like the one legit one where the Bears were just a better team and played better that day. So the Bears could sit there for all intents and purposes, go 4-12, 5-11, and technically be a better team than they were last year. It's possible. It is very possible the way I see it. It's kind of one of these things too for the Bears. I think they're in an interesting bind because they're in a situation where they need to totally and completely rebuild, and it's going to take years to do that. That's how bad it is for the Bears organization, no matter how much Bears fans might try to convince themselves otherwise. They need to tank, but they're also in a situation where they can't really tank because they have a coach that you can't tank with. You don't bring in John Fox to tank the next 3 years. You bring in John Fox to turn things around and make you competitive and eventually make you a contender. You can't do that when you're tanking. So it's an interesting conflict. The Bears need to rebuild, but they've got a coach that you can't really rebuild with. I do expect the defense to be improved, and most importantly of all, have an identity. Bears fans know the last 2 years, on top of the blown assignments and the lack of discipline and the lack of pretty much everything, the most frustrating thing about the Bears defense, when you watch that vanilla-ass 4-3 under Mel Tucker, you said, what the hell are they about? What the hell is their identity? Just like their entire team didn't have an identity, their defense in particular didn't have an identity. I expect under John Fox, they are going to have an identity. And that identity alone is going to make them better, along with the superior coaching that they're going to get out of Vic Fangio and John Fox. I expect that defense to be a somewhere between 14th to 20th ranked unit in the NFL. And again, based off of where they've been the last 2 seasons, that's a significant improvement with the lack of talent that they have on that side of the ball. I expect the offense to be a little less explosive with the loss of Brandon Marshall and Matt Forte being another year older. But I perhaps expected to be a little more consistent because as much as everybody wanted to talk about the Bears' awesome weapons in 2014, it was an up and down yo-yo offense that really wasn't all that good. So many times they would go 3 and out. So many times you had no idea what the hell they were doing in terms of an offensive game plan. And again, just like on the defensive side of the ball, Mark Trestman's supposed to be this great quarterback whisperer and offensive guru. They had absolutely no identity and direction on that side of the ball. John Fox is a conservative coach by nature. He believes in defense and running the football. While he's not going to want to run the ball 60 times every game, he's going to want to run the ball more and more consistently, which means the Bears are going to stick with that rushing attack more, means they're going to take the ball out of Cutler's hands some, which is the only shot you freaking have because you put it in his hands more, you're asking for freaking trouble, and if you don't see that after 6 years, you're stupid. So I expect fewer big plays out of the Bears offense. I expect to see a slight scaling back in the amount of leeway they give to Cutler and the amount of trust they give to Cutler. And that's probably to a benefit of the team and all parties involved. It could lead to a more consistent, less turnover prone, less 3-and-out prone offensive unit. When I look at this Bears team, I see where 3 or 4 wins could be a distinct possibility. This is not a good team. It really, really isn't. And I think a lot of people know this. 3 to 4 wins is very, very possible. And like I said, based off of last year, still 3 or 4 wins technically could be an improvement, even though it wouldn't reflect in the 1-loss record. There is a part of me as a Bears fan where on the one hand, I don't want to see him suck because I get tired of it. On the other hand, I know at some point in time, they've got to bottom out completely in order to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. They have to do it. And the longer they don't do it is the longer they kick that bucket down the road and the longer they just mitigate the mediocrity at Hell's Hall. Now, on the flip side, with John Fox in the fold, maybe taking some of that pressure off of Jay Cutler, an improved defensive unit under head coach John Fox and defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, you look at a team, and with that last play schedule and some of the teams they do play, like Washington, like San Francisco, maybe at times this Bears team could play above themselves, play above their talent, and could see a situation where they could win 7 or 8 games. That is also possible as well. I don't know how likely that is. Just as like I don't think it's likely the Bears will win only 3 or 4 games. I really think the range for the Bears this upcoming season is somewhere between 5 to 7 wins. So they end up with a draft pick somewhere between pick 6 and probably pick 12 to 14. That would be just like the Chicago Bears. Be bad enough to be out of it, but not bad enough to get a top 3, top 5 pick, so that way you can get a quarterback and really rebuild this damn thing.